There's much to get one's teeth into in that reading from Luke's Gospel, and I don't just mean the meal that was offered. The first 24 verses describe what was discussed at a meal. But to me, the most surprising thing is that the meal took place at all. It seems to have been a put-up job to get more ammunition to throw at Jesus. A Pharisee, presumably hostile to him, asked him to lunch or dinner or the Sunday roast or whatever it was, and then produced a sick man who Jesus healed, ostensibly breaking their law. Jesus justified his action in law as well as in humanity. And then after that story, which we didn't read, we come to 8 verses of our lesson headed in my translation, humility and hospitality. Both subjects create problems. Humility, initially in respect of seating arrangements, as described to the children, and hospitality, too, can produce problems far removed from the menu itself. We know many occasions when a good seat is the thing to have, but taken to its extreme, it can be a bit ridiculous. As I mentioned to the children, no one was fighting to get on the front row this morning at the service. And indeed, humility is not one of the qualities we find easy to cherish. But somehow in this incident, Jesus describes an eternal truth. It seems that humility has always been the quality of great people, but a genuine humility, nothing forced, something that we can see is real and not for show. To show off our humility is, well, just showing off. Some wear it almost like a badge, anticipating a compliment. False modesty often enters the picture. But we know from life's experience that it's only the little person who is self-important, the Jobsworth character, who's never got very far in life, but delights in chucking his weight about and annoying the rest of us. I wonder, can we retain our humility, particularly in areas where we consider ourselves, well, not all that bad after all? And we can retain it, first of all, by realizing the facts. However much we know, it is very little compared with the sum total of knowledge. However much we have achieved very little in the end. However important we may believe ourselves to be, almost to the point of thinking that we're indispensable, but we learn perhaps when we retire from work, or eventually when our life is over, life and work will go on just the same. And of course, we retain our humility by comparison with the perfect, or just even the better, never mind the best. The amateur musician who thinks he doesn't do too badly and then he hears a real master may feel like breaking his guitar or smashing the piano or disconnecting the electronic organ. The sportsman who sees a real expert and sees that the things that he finds so difficult to achieve are achieved very easily. And then in the kitchen, people a lot more fussy than myself perhaps complain that they can never produce a meal up to the quality of the chefs who appear on the television. We sometimes feel we've been brought down to earth with a bump, but will hopefully be inspired to improve rather than give up. 1 or 2 pieces of paper show that we local preachers have a certain, or is it uncertain, ability to take a service, and then we are humbled almost to despair when we hear a real saint of God speak. And because he is a saint, he is humble and has no inkling of his inspired ministry. And if we set our lives beside the life of Jesus, we see our unworthiness in comparison with his perfection. Pride dies, self-satisfaction will be shriveled up. And I suppose that's the end of part 1, humility. hospitality. Or perhaps the question we should ask is, what's in it for me? We should be gracious, of course. I think it was George Bernard Shaw who was attending a dinner, and he was never very tactful. And after hors d'oeuvre where the lettuce had wilted, soup that was tepid, fish that had congealed, a roast where the gravy too had congealed, finally the iced sorbet arrived. And Bernard Shaw turned to his host and said, "Thank goodness, something warm at last." Hospitality, or what's in it for me? A new minister arrived at a new circuit and trying to, do the job properly, asked the chief circuit steward who he should visit, who are most important in the circuit, so to make a good impression and get off to a good start. He said, "Well, never mind who's important. You want to go and see so-and-so, you get an excellent afternoon tea there." I said, "Oh, right, I'll go there first." "Oh," and he said, "don't forget to ask to see the parrot." I said, "The parrot?" "Yes, go and ask to see the parrot." I said, "Oh, fair enough." So he went to see the chap who was, like all circuit stewards, tactful, efficient, charming, everything you expect a circuit steward to be. I know that, I was one once. He ate the afternoon tea, and we were just going to the door. He said, "Do you mind if I could just have a look at your parrot?" I said, "Oh, yes." Go into the front room, and there was the parrot on its perch. He said, "It's a remarkable bird." And the minister said, "So I've heard." He said, "What's remarkable about it?" He said, "Watch this." Tugged at its right claw, and it started singing "Onward, Christian Soldiers." I said, "My, this is remarkable." He said, "You've seen nothing yet. Watch this." Pulled at his left. He said, "This is what we do at funerals." Pulled at its left claw, it sings "Abide with me," and the parrot chirped up again. So the minister, wanting to be sort of sensitive to this wonderful bird, said, "What happens if you pull both claws at the same time?" The parrot said, "I fall off my perch, of course." Jesus makes it very clear that whether there's entertainment on offer or not, there is nothing the least bit praiseworthy in giving a lunch or dinner if you know that this is going to be reciprocated, if you will, returned with interest. This isn't charity, as he points out in the parable. You're being paid for what you did. Jesus tells us to take a long, hard look at our acts of charity, such as they are. If we ask ourselves the question, what's in it for me? And then find a positive answer, then it's not charity. It's almost like sponsorship. Paying £500 to have your name on a board somewhere, or buying a brick and have your name inscribed. Very worthy. Good luck to the people raising money by these ploys. We want as much money for good causes as we can raise. But we have to ask ourselves, what are the motives behind our generosity? What prompts us to give? Sometimes it's embarrassment, isn't it? You get the knock at the door, and there's a Christian Aid envelope distributor. We know how that is greeted sometimes. A knock at the door, if somebody we've never seen before and it's a cause we're not interested in, we might make some sort of a token gesture. But what happens if it's a friend or neighbour collecting money, say, for orphan hedgehogs or battery hens or something like that? Rather than be embarrassed, we will cough up a reasonable sum of money. And then how about charity, which is really nothing more than a sense of duty? There doesn't seem to be much wrong with that on the face of it. The people raising the money are delighted to get it, however. But that places our so-called charity in the same category as paying our council tax, our income tax, or the tithe or tenth sometimes imposed by other organisations. Often in America, where joining the evangelical church on offer is accompanied by a direct debit form to be completed before leaving the service. How about self-interest? The wrong answer to the what's in it for me. Consciously or unconsciously, our giving is some kind of investment. The mother-in-law who buys her daughter-in-law a washing up machine because she's sick of doing the washing up every time she visits her son. I always used to get particularly fascinating Christmas presents from my father. It was only when I got to a certain age that I realised he was buying the presents for himself and not for me at all. Or perhaps in the divine bookkeeping system, we are building up some kind of a credit balance. Going back 50 or 60 years, I remember a Tony Hancock sketch where the Salvation Army come knocking at the door, and he ostentatiously shows his neighbour that he's putting a half-crown in the box. And then he speculates with his pal, that probably means that St. Peter's got a special note in his book to let me in because I gave half a crown to the Salvation Army. So look at the chap next door, he was very furtive about it. Are you too mean to give any money? Said Tony. He said, well, I only put in a £5. Such giving is not generosity, but rationalising or justifying selfishness. And then perhaps we give to gain feelings of superiority, pride spoiling any virtue in the giving, gratifying one's own vanity. Of course, ideally you need an audience and somebody to be made to feel very small. And Jesus' story about the widow's mite at the temple puts us in our places there. The rabbis in Jesus' time had a saying that the best kind of giving was when the giver did not know to whom he was giving, and the receiver did not know who was giving it to him. Perhaps we do get it right, at least some of the time, when we give because we cannot help it. We know many Christians, and many of other faiths and none, who simply give because they're inspired to do so. It's part of their character. It's who they are. There are many people like that in our church, in our town, and thankfully in our world. They're not thinking about anything except giving. It comes naturally to them. And often you see it's the same people who somehow manage to produce more time out of thin air. The law of God's kingdom is crystal clear. If we give to gain a reward of some kind, thus answering the question, what's in it for me, then there is no reward. But if we give with no thought of reward, whether in cash, time, service, or love, our reward is certain. God gave his Son. God gave because God so loved the world, and so must we. Well, it's not Whit Sunday, but a Whit Sunday hymn seems appropriate to voice the sentiments and thoughts I've tried to express. We rely on the Holy Spirit to inspire us, to give because we cannot help ourselves, and to never lose our sense of genuine humility.